You got it. Yep, whenever you're, okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Sotomayor. I am the New York State PTA Leadership Coordinator. I hope everyone's doing well this evening. Before we get started, did you know by attending this webinar, you could qualify for a leadership development pin? There are simple steps for you to qualify and what you have to do. So step one is attend at least 6 of these awesome webinars. Step 2 is to take in all of the knowledge like a sponge. Step 3 is to apply what you've learned in the unit or district level and show us how you're making waves. Once you've nailed these steps and wowed us with your leadership skills, you'll unlock the secret treasure, the exclusive LD award pin. It's not just a pin, it's a badge of honor that says you're a rock star in your organization, in our organization. The question that you're going to be on the lookout for tonight is, where can you find information about the process of nominations and elections? Without further ado, I am very happy to introduce Jackie Wilson, our leadership training specialist, who will be presenting our webinar tonight, Nominations and Elections. It's a mystery to me.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome everyone. One of the things that, as a region director, probably the second most frequent question that we received at the region level is about nominations and elections, certainly after finances. And so I hope that by viewing this webinar and sharing it with your membership, it will help you be on the way to a successful nominations and elections season. So let's begin. First of all, the nominations, for all information on nominations and elections, we have our New York State Resource Guide, Section 7. And you go to the www.nyspta.org and click on the Leaders tab, and then click on the Resource Guide. And you go into Section 7, which is Bylaws, Procedures, Nominations, and Elections. And it starts on page 19. There's the Resource Guide, front of Section 7, as you see here. And that's the title. And here is the section, nominations are in order, and this gives you where leadership begins, okay? If you think about this, I like to kind of equate it to students who are seniors preparing for college, okay? Usually happens around January, and they start getting out their applications and things before that, but in the meantime, they're starting to think about where they want to go and what they want to do. They're planning. And so the same happens in our PTAs. Usually around the beginning of the year, we start to think about, well, we have to start planning for next year. And that's the process of nominations and elections. It's your unit coming up with a plan for who will lead your membership in the next year. For the first part of this, we need to have an election for the nominating committee. And this is very important. As I mentioned, one of the things that happens is that people are just chosen for the nominating committee. And it doesn't give everyone who wants to a fair shake in terms of being able to be a part of the nominating committee. According with your bylaws, okay, it must be done at least 60 days prior to your election, but it can certainly be any time prior to that. That's up to your unit. The bylaws will specify the total number of members of the committee, how many are elected from the executive board and from the general membership, as well as if an alternate is elected. And the committee, once it's elected, elects its own chair. And that's according to Robert's rules. The first named member of the committee, so when you have your list, the first person's name on the list becomes the temporary chair to allow the committee to meet to elect its own chair. And this is a special committee, not a standing committee. A special committee is a committee in which it has a specific job to do. And once that job is finished, the committee disbands. The best option, of course, is to have a live meeting for the election of the committee. You need representatives from both your executive board, which is, of course, your officers and your standing committee chairs, and also might include your principal, your student liaison, your historian, whatever is your makeup of your executive board, and that's stated in your bylaws. And you need representation from your general membership. And again, this is to ensure that you have a broad amount of people in terms of who they are, who they know, and how they can assist the nominations process. It can be held on the same day. For example, start your executive board meeting at 7 p.m. just for executive board members, because only they can vote for the executive board members. And then at 7:30, once that election is done, you have your general membership meeting, and then you elect a general members for the nominating committee, and then you can go on with the business of your meeting. It probably should be at the beginning of the meeting when you're mostly going to have the most people. If available, you can consider a hybrid meeting to allow participation from more members. And our website has previously presented webinars on virtual nominations and elections and technology tools. For additional information, check our leaders page under training materials. Having the meeting, okay, the chair will select the time and place for the meeting that all members are able to attend. But only the elected members of the committee may attend, and it can be a virtual meeting. But again, only members of the committee may attend. It's preferable to do it in a private setting, not in the middle of a faculty room, or unless you have a specific conference room in your school that you might be able to use. But you don't want to be interrupted. You don't want people walking in and out. You want to concentrate on your role in selecting the people for nomination. If an alternate is elected, they will only attend if another member is unavailable to attend. As I said, a private setting free from distractions. You will need a copy of the bylaws, and recommendation letters should be sent out by the chair to the membership. You can use a Google form, you can use a hard copy that is sent home, but they would be sent back to the nominating committee chair for confidentiality. And we suggest creating a unique email for the nominating committee chair so that only that person will receive this information, and they alone will share it with the rest of the committee during their deliberations. So you could use nominations24@gmail or whatever, or the name of your unit, and then that email can be then used by the next person, but only that person that has that email can accept the recommendation forms and pass it on to the rest of the nominating committee. And of course, a copy of the current membership list, because all nominees must be a member of the association at the time of election. So here's a possible nominations form. You just want to list the offices, a recommendation form, I'm sorry, and the qualifications and comments. And you can do this for each office. And then again, how you distribute them and how you collect them is up to you. If you're doing it by mail, then of course you would have a unique email, not the PTA email box, because that can be picked up by anybody, but a place or an email that can only go to the nominating committee chair. When you're looking at the meeting, you need to know the following. Your bylaws and procedures will tell you the officers to be elected and their term of office. If the council delegates are appointed or elected by the executive board or elected by the membership. And this information is found in Article 13 of your bylaws. The month of the election meeting and when the slate of officers should be published. This is a very important piece. And if there's a required 2-day notice to run from the floor. Again, that's a very important thing to know. And all of that information is in your bylaws. So here's a section of the bylaws of a typical unit. Here is the officers. This particular unit has a president, 3 vice presidents, a recording secretary, a corresponding secretary, and a treasurer. So these are the officers that are in that unit, and those are the ones where you will need to nominate people for those positions. Officers are elected by ballot in the month of April. So right away, April is your election month. And again, this is in your bylaws, your own unit's bylaws. If there is only one nominee, then you can have an election by voice vote. And officers shall assume their duties on July 1 and shall serve for a term of 1 year or until a successor is elected. So these are 1-year terms in this particular unit. Then it talks about the nominating committee. Shall be a nominating committee consisting of 5 members, 2 elected by the executive board from its body, and 3 who will not be members of the executive board, elected by the association, that means a general membership, at a meeting at least 60 days prior to the election meeting, and the committee shall elect its chair. So your bylaws are specific to your unit, and they will give you this information, all of this information in your own unit or council bylaws. The other part here is the report must be published 2 weeks prior to the meeting. Again, part of your bylaws. And this is the caveat that I mentioned about the 2-day notice. Additional nominations may be made from the floor provided the written consent of the nominee has been secured and the chair of the nominating committee has received notice at least 2 business days prior to the election meeting of the candidate's intention to run. You may not have this clause in your bylaws, but it is important to note whether or not you do. And again, this will tell you when that committee's final slate of officers will be published. For councils, there is also information here about how many council delegates that the council allows for your unit. And the number is not to exceed the maximum number allowed as determined by the council bylaws. For example, if your council bylaws allow for 3 council delegates per unit, then that's what would be here in your own bylaws, okay? And here it also tells you how the council delegates are chosen. In this case, they are appointed by the president in cooperation with the executive committee. Again, they could be elected by the membership, or they could be elected by the executive board, or appointed by the president. So this is an important thing to know. So you need to know whether or not the nominating committee needs to choose a person or persons for the council delegate. So as the meeting opens, the recommendation form should only be opened at the meeting in the presence of all committee members. Again, these are for information only. They're recommendations. It's not counting up who gets how many recommendations. That is not what the recommendation forms are for. Deliberate on who will be the best candidate for each position. If a member of the nominating committee is being considered for an office, as happens frequently, they should leave the meeting during the discussion of that person. Consider the kind of leadership that will best achieve the aims and purposes of the PTA. And this is important. Review the tenure of incumbent officers to determine their eligibility. Remember, they are eligible, not entitled for another term in the same office or in another position. So just because they have, served as president for 1 year, maybe it was not the best job for them, and maybe they need to be replaced. Doesn't mean they automatically get another term. And I think that's a misnomer that a lot of units think, well, they're 1 year term, but they're allowed to serve for 2 years, so we just automatically roll them over. No, every year that there's an election, every year that there are new terms of office, there must be an election. It is not an automatic. You go through the process. And it is very important, because when things happen where people say, oh, we're just giving the same people the job again, that's when you have people who become very upset and very intuitive about what's going on here, who's running this PTA, why do I not have a say? And you never want to take away the right of the membership in this particular case. And by doing that, you're stripping them of their right to vote for who they think was the best candidate. All offices terms are for 1 year, unless some bylaws do suggest a 2-year term. If it is a 2-year term, then you must remember that that person you are nominating and electing will serve in that office for 2 years. So that's important to note, okay? And avoid reshuffling offices. We see that all the time, that it's the same people, nobody else can get into the office. We just have the president, who then becomes the treasurer, and the treasurer becomes a secretary, and so on. And that does not grow your leadership. What it does is it causes the PTA to stagnate, and you lose members, and then the PTA is going to start to become very difficult in terms of membership and leadership. So try to get as many people involved as you can, and that's important. And that's why the voting piece of it is so very important. Again, I can't stress enough that all deliberations should be confidential. You call a candidate that the nominating committee suggests, and they say, you know what, I really don't think I have the time. Okay, that's fine. Then you call the next candidate and you say, well, Susan didn't really want to do it, so we decided on you. I mean, no, okay? You don't tell somebody that they're your second or third or fourth choice, all right? How do you think that makes them feel? When you call a person is for that particular office, if they say, no, thank you, or I can't do it, that's fine. Then yes, you go on to the next person. But they should always be treated as if they were the first choice, because sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But it becomes a little difficult if you start talking to them that way. Once the slate has been completed, the chair will call the potential nominees. When the chair has received verbal acceptance from the nominee, the chair will send a formal acceptance letter to each one that should be signed and returned to the chair. And this is their way of saying, yes, I accept the nomination. Okay, so it's almost as if they're nominating themselves, okay, almost, but it's in their agreement to run for office. So that's a very important piece. And once they have that acceptance, then the chair will contact the president. So the proposed slate can be published for the membership. This is done by the president. So the president needs to know what the slate is, okay, according to the bylaws. And we saw before in the bylaws that it could be either 2 weeks before or 1 month before. Again, that is in your bylaws. I can't stress the bylaws enough here. All nominees must be members of the PTA at the time of election, and this has actually been put into every unit's bylaws now. The chair should communicate this to the potential nominees. So while they may not have joined yet, but they should have, they will have to join before the election meeting so that they can be elected. The proposed slate should be kept confidential until all nominees have accepted and the announcement has been made to the membership. And the committee should complete a final written report signed by each member to be included in the minutes of the election meeting. Remember that a lot of times when you go to a bank to open up a bank account, they will ask for the minutes of the meeting at which your officers, who will be signers of the checks, were elected. So it's important to keep good records, and minutes are absolutely important. So here's a sample form that you would send to your nominee. I would like to thank you for accepting the nomination for this position, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and then this would be your report as the nominating committee chair. We met on this date, we acted in accordance with the bylaws, followed the resource guide, and placed the following nominations in office for the PTA. So this is just a formal report that gets filed with the minutes, secretary's minutes, so you have proof of all of the information that the committee is sharing with the membership. Now, we mentioned about a report that has to be published. However your PTA communicates with your members, whether it be Facebook or bulletin board or newsletter or emails, this needs to be done either 2 weeks or 1 month prior to the election meeting, okay? So you would state the following members have been nominated to serve as officers for the 24-25 school year. List the officers. When the election will take place, our general meeting on May 25th, and about the membership. You must be a member in order to vote in the election. Membership will be accepted until 5 p.m. on May 23rd. There are no absentee ballots. You must be present in order to vote. And the last part here is that letter F we saw in the bylaws. According to our bylaws, notice of intent to run from the floor must be received at least 2 business days prior to the date of the election, and you give the information as to where that intent to run goes. It will go to the nominating committee chair by a certain time and date. So anybody who looks at the slate and says, you know, I really think I would be a better vice president, I'm going to say that I wish to run from the floor. There is specific information there on how they do that, so that nobody can say, well, I didn't know I had to run. I didn't know when the meeting was for the election. I would have been there. This is all published so that every member can see this, and every member is entitled to know this. So what about open positions or vacancies? What if a nominee who accepted withdraws their name? Well, if prior to the election meeting, then the committee can reconvene to nominate another candidate, and then that second choice should be conveyed and given to the membership as well. If there is no time for the committee to meet, then the office will be considered an open position and will be addressed at the election meeting. If no candidate gives the required prior notice, in other words, if you have that 2-day notice, then it becomes an unfilled position, and the unit must then announce the unfilled position until some time as a name or names are submitted. Once that happens, they can hold a special election meeting to fill that position. This, again, is a new part of the bylaws pattern that was just recently added to kind of make it clear what happens in the case of an open position. And if the nominee has already been elected and resigns, then it becomes a vacancy, and that's filled differently. That is filled by a vote of the executive board. So 2 different scenarios here between whether somebody withdraws their name before the election or whether they resign after they have been elected. So the election meeting. Notice of the date of the election meeting should be made to the membership at least 30 days prior to the date of meeting. When you publish your calendar for the year, April, election meeting, very important. Make sure you put that on the election meeting, on the date when the election meeting is happening. Follow the guidelines for elections as outlined in the resource guide. This is a general membership meeting, and only those present can vote. There are no absentee ballots. So the membership chair must have a current membership list so that when ballots are handed out, if there needs to be, or people are voting, they're definitely members of the unit at the time. And that's why I mentioned in the publishing, say that all people must be members, there's no absentee ballots, and give them a date by which the membership must be done, so that you're not running around the day of the election meeting trying to get members. And the fact that you can do it by Member Hub now makes it a lot easier than having to sign a check and hand it into the membership chair. So it really is convenient to join very, very quickly. And a set of meeting rules can be sent along. And this is important because what do you do with an election where you have a contested election? How do you run it? Well, in your procedures, okay, sorry, went back one too many. You have possible meeting rules, and these are adopted by your executive board, okay? And possibly they can be the following. There's but one candidate for an office. The election will be by voice vote. Okay, Robert's rule states that if only one person is nominated and the bylaws do not require that a ballot vote be taken, okay, the chair can simply declare that the nominee is elected. Okay, if there's more than one candidate, the election will be by ballot vote. Each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute statement stating their reasons and qualifications for running for office. 2 tellers will be appointed to count the ballots and certify the election. Voting will close immediately after all ballots have been collected. The election will be by majority, and the election's results will be announced as soon as possible after the balloting is finished. This way, everybody has a clear understanding of how the election will take place. So it's very important that you have these meeting rules in the case of a contested election. So here's scenario 1, okay? No candidates are running from the floor, okay? First of all, always important in any general meeting is, do you have a quorum? And again, that's a number that is listed in your bylaws. If no one is running from the floor or no position is being challenged, then your election is simply by voice vote. That's in your bylaws. The nominating committee chair announces the proposed slate of officers, and the report is filed with the secretary's minutes. Showed you before, you put together a report signed by the members of the committee that goes directly into the secretary's minutes. The president then will announce each office in turn and allow for a voice vote each time. The nominating committee chair does not run the election. It is the president or the presiding officer. If the president is not there, the vice president or whoever would be doing the meeting. But the nominating committee chair just reads the nominating committee's report. So the president would state, for the office of president, the nominee is Joe Marsh. All in favor say aye. You have elected Joe Marsh as your president. Congratulations. Or the president can simply say, Joe Marsh is declared elected. Again, Robert's rules. When there is but one candidate for an office, that candidate is declared elected. Members can only vote against a candidate by nominating an alternate candidate. So if there's one person, there are no votes. Okay, it is aye. All is one person has to say aye, and they are elected. Once all candidates have been elected, you've completed your work and the nominating committee's work is done. Scenario 2 is where somebody has given notice, 2 days notice of intent to run from the floor. So you need to make sure that the secretary has ballots and teller sheets. Teller sheets are to tally the results. These can be prepared in advance, since you will know the names of the candidates for each office prior to the meeting, because the nominating committee chair will say that or give that information to the president who's going to be running the election meeting. The nominating committee chair will read the proposed slate of officers, and then taking one office at a time, the president will ask the chair if there were any notices of intent to run received. Any office for which there is more than one candidate must have a ballot vote, and each office that is being contested should have a separate vote. And as I said, because you know ahead of time, the secretary can be prepared with the ballots for the vote. And instructions for voting should be given by the president, such as check only one name, fold your ballot in half, hand the ballot to the teller, whatever your procedures are to make sure that there is no confusion or miscommunication about, well, I didn't know you're supposed to check the ballot. The instruction should be given right up front. And scenario number 3, you have candidates that may run from the floor. There's no 2-day notice according to your bylaws. So the president will announce the nominating committee's chair for the choice of the office, and then ask if there are any nominations from the floor. A candidate can self-nominate or be nominated by someone else, but must accept the nomination. Prior to the election, each candidate may be given the opportunity to speak according to the meeting rules. Names of candidates should be written down on a board or easel or projected on a screen so that everybody can see the candidates that would be running. Ballots are distributed and instructions from the president should be given regarding the ballots. Again, print first and last name of the candidate, fold the ballot in half, hand the ballot to the teller, or place it in a ballot box. And once the results are announced, the election for that office is over, and the election for the next office can proceed until all offices have been elected. And again, scenario-wise, this has happened. When you announce the result, okay, the teller hands a tally sheet to the president, and then the president announces the result. Total votes cast, 40. Needed for election, 21. Joe Marsh received 25. Jane Doe, 11. There were 4 invalid ballots for whatever reason. You have elected Joe Marsh as your president. Congratulations. And the secretary records the results in the minutes as they are given by the president. The process of nominations and elections can at times become highly contentious and spark controversy. As I mentioned in the beginning, very many questions on this when I was a region director. If your unit is concerned that there may be a contested or controversial election, you can contact your region director. Having the election conducted by an impartial party can help to dispel any notion that the election is not being completed fairly. So that's always information for you to note, that if you are really having a hard time with an election, if there has been some impropriety in the past, and you want to make sure that it's done correctly, as I said, it's only you being transparent to your membership, which they appreciate. By all means, contact your region director and they can come in and be an impartial party to run your election. By following the processes and procedures here in the presentation, you can assure that membership in your PTA is being transparent and you are able to proceed with your election. And that's it. Questions?
We do have a question. It's from Valida. If purchasing a membership to run for office, is it a current school year membership, or can it be the next year for May and June elections?
Excellent question. And this is again in your bylaws now. It must be the year that you're being elected. So if it's 24-25, you would have to have a membership for 24-25 to be elected. I mean, do you want somebody who's not a member of your PTA to be elected? I mean, that's the way it is. And then you would also have to buy a membership then for the following year to continue, because you have to be a member in order to be an officer.
I have one more question. Does a person have to be present to be considered during an election?
Okay, this can be one of 2 things. If you have been nominated by the nominating committee and you have signed the report that says, I accept the nomination, then no, if you are unable to be at the meeting of the election, you can still be elected. If you're running from the floor in 2-day notice, I would suggest that's not necessarily the case, because people don't know you, they don't know who you are, and it would be wise to be available because you are putting yourself out there. It's different when you have a signed consent saying, I will run. But somebody just running from the floor, they're not there. Do we really know they want to be elected or they don't? So they really should be there if they want to run from the floor with the 2-day notice, or even just running from the floor. Okay, but if they're part of the nominating committee because they've already been certified as being the nominee, then no, they have a commitment, but there's a signed letter saying that they wish to be elected. Other questions?
I have a question for you, Jackie.
Sure.
For our LD award pin, where can I find information about the process of nominations and elections?
Okay, number 1 is, of course, checking your unit or council bylaws. Okay, that will give you a lot of information about the meeting date, as I went through earlier in the presentation. And secondly, the New York State PTA Resource Guide has a wealth of information, and it spells out a lot of the information that I've talked about here. And we've tried to, the bylaws coordinator, Pat Hashitata, has tried to put into place in the bylaws some very specific language about who has to be a member, when they have to be a member, what happens for an open position, what happens for a vacancy, so that it's made clear to every unit in council how these things are considered. So I would definitely take a look at the new bylaws pattern for those items, especially as I said about the election, you must be a member at the time of election. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. For the committee, do we ask folks if they're interested in being on the committee, or does the board just elect first and then ask if they'll be willing to accept the nominating position?
For the nominating committee, you must do it as an election. So you do it in 2 separate elections, as I mentioned. You do one for just the executive board members who can only be from the executive board. That would mean your officers, other than the president, of course, they are never part of the nominating committee. And the chairs of the standing committee, your principal, your teacher liaison, whatever other people you have on the executive board. For the second election, it's from the general membership. In other words, it can't be an officer or the principal or the teacher liaison or any chair of a standing committee. So if they're not on the executive board, then they could be considered as a member of the nominating committee as just a general member. But definitely 2 elections. You can certainly ask for people to be, if they'd like to, that's not a problem, but that's what you do when you raise your hand. Okay, we need nominees for the nominating committee. Do I have any people? And certainly you can nominate yourself, just like you can for an office. So certainly raise your hand if you wish to be chosen, and then an election should take place. If there's 3 positions and 3 people, then those 3 people obviously would be elected, since there's no contention. If you have more than 3 people that decide they wish to run for the nominating committee, then you must have it by election, which would be a ballot vote. And don't do it by raising hands. That's not a fair way to do it. Anything
Can
else?
someone with no child in the school run for an office in the PTA? its
Absolutely.
PTA?
As a member, you have every right of a member, and that includes the right to run for office and to be an officer. So as long as you have a paid dues, have paid dues for that unit for that year, then yes, you can be nominated and elected to an office. Nothing about children or not children in the unit.
If an alternate needs to be elected, should they be from the board or from general membership?
I don't think it really matters, okay? I would tend to think there's no specifics on that. The alternate is elected. Generally, what might happen is if you have 4 members, 3 members from the executive board, and you have 4 people elected, then you might say, well, that person would be the alternate. So it doesn't specify which it has to be. I would tend to say that the larger of the 2 groups, because it's always an odd number, the larger of the 2 groups should be the one that has the yeah, I can't think of the word, the alternate. Okay, sorry about that. But it's not anywhere written specifically. What you might do is, in order to clarify that, so there's no contention about that, is in your procedures, which can't say enough about procedures here, in your procedures for the nominating committee, it can state that an alternate will be elected from the general membership, or an alternate will be elected from the executive board. So that way there's no contention about, oh, well, wait a minute, how come she's from the executive board or he's from not from the membership? So put it into your procedures, and then it will always be done that way. If, again, it has to be in your bylaws first. So if it's not in your bylaws, there is no alternate, okay? Only if your bylaws state there's an alternate. That's, again, the piece that I always keep stressing upon, is the bylaws are so important. Any other questions? Anybody like to unmute and ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
We have a few. Can 2 people run as co-presidents together?
Yes, co-presidents will run together. When co-presidents are chosen, they run as a pair. If somebody's going to run against them, they either run 2 co-presidents against them, or they run a single president against the 2 co-presidents. But yes, they do run as a pair. They are co, which means they share that office. So they're 2 people sharing one office. But yes, they do run together. They do not run against each other. But you can nominate a president to run against 2 co-presidents. But it's not a pick and choose, the people get 2 votes. No, it's Jackie and Jane running for co-president. They're the ones that are being voted for versus, let's say, Sarah, who's running as a single president. Okay, so co-presidents run together.
Okay, the next question is, can someone pay now for next year's membership?
Membership, that's a good question for you, Mary. I'll set that one to you. I'll send that one to Mary as former membership coordinator.
You will be able to purchase membership for the following year a little earlier, but not just yet. It'll be a little later in the year. I believe it's in May 1st, if I'm not mistaken. But you will get plenty of awareness about early membership. I hope that answers your question.
However, you still must be a member this year to be elected. Doesn't matter if you buy one for next year and you're an officer, you absolutely have to. But otherwise, you would have to be a member this year first.
Correct.
To be elected. And to vote. I mean, if you're not a member, how could you vote for yourself? So that doesn't make sense.
That's your biggest power.
That's right,
as a
exactly.
member. So the next question is, what happens when a member of I think this is the unit, runs for a position? Do they abstain from that particular selection? Laura, if you're on, could you unmute yourself and repeat that question? I think I may have gotten it wrong.
Oh, well, I'll check the secure. I'll make sure everybody can unmute. Okay. Go ahead. If you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I was wondering, and I apologize if you already answered this. I logged on about 10 minutes late. But if you are on the nominating committee and want to run for an open officer position, do you just abstain yourself from discussing that particular position? Like, how does that work?
Yes, you would. If you're in a live meeting, you would just step out of the room. If you're on a Zoom meeting or Zoom call, you would just get off the call and then come back on if the discussion is done. So yes, you absolutely are not in on the discussion for your position. Yes. Okay.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, the next question is where do we find the nomination form?
Where do we find, say again, Mary,
the nomination forms?
Nomination forms, you mean recommendation forms? You can just make them yourself. I mean, you can use a Google form. You can do what I used in the presentation there, just a paper form. A Google form is probably the quickest and easiest way to get them out there and get them back. So you just have a person, they're done anonymously. So you would say, I nominate blank for the office of president, and then give reasons. So you would do that and have reasons why you think this person should be president. And then they get sent on to the nominating committee chair. But that's why if you're going to use a Google form,
Jackie, you muted yourself.
how did I do that? But that's so that when you send out the Google form or any form, that it only goes to the nominating committee chair. So if you have a separate email for them, that's a great way to do it so that only the nominating committee chair gets those recommendation forms, and then they share it with the whole nominating committee. Okay, you can make up your own form. Like you say, Google forms pretty easy to do. Or a paper form that's sent home or emailed to people, but with a specific place that it's going to, not just in the PTA mailbox, okay?
Okay, our next question is, do bylaws have a list? Do bylaws have to list co-presidents are allowed?
Yes, your bylaws will say you will have a president or two co-presidents. So that is in your bylaws. If it's not in your bylaws, you cannot elect co-presidents. You must change your bylaws, amend your bylaws to list them as co-presidents. You can do either or, okay? It's always favorable to have a president, but if the nominating committee chooses to, and it's in the bylaws, they can nominate co-presidents for the office, but only if it's listed in your bylaws.
Okay, And the last question I see here is, can someone who is on the board and is on the nominating committee be the chair, or should it be non-board members?
Your nominating committee gets elected in the way that I mentioned, and then they meet to elect their chair. So that is up to the committee to decide. There is no hard and fast rule as to who that person should be. So the nominating committee itself will elect its chair, and it's up to them to decide who would be the best person for the job. So there's no hard or fast rule there, because it is an election done by only the members of the nominating committee, including the alternate. If there is an alternate, they would also be in on electing the chair as well, but they could not be the chair themselves as an alternate. Anything else? Last call.
Next question is, do the nominations have to be anonymous?
They don't have to be, no. You can certainly put your name on who you recommend. You can self-nominate. We certainly encourage that. And if you wish to self-nominate, I'm nominating myself for the office of president because. So no, they do not have to be anonymous. Most people prefer to do it anonymously, but you can certainly sign your name if you wish. But they don't have to be anonymous. And again, self-nominations are always accepted. The only thing they should be is confidential. That's the key word. Confidential, only to the nominating committee. So that's more important. That's the most important piece. The recommendation forms are confidential and only seen by the nominating committee.
I think that is our last question, unless there's anyone else that has any other questions, please put them in there.
I have one more question, if I could
Go
ask.
ahead.
If you have co-presidents and they count as only one vote, do
Yes.
they count as one for quorum as well?
No, because quorum is members, so I don't believe they count as one. They would count because they're two members. So I believe it's not the office. They count in the office as one, but as a member, they are each members. So therefore, they would count two as a quorum.
Thank you.
Okay. Because every member gets counted. And so, you can't just say, oh, who's going to be the member today? They're both members, but they only get one vote.
One more, can the president recommend nominees to the nominating committee?
Absolutely. That is part of their role. They know who they've worked with. If it's a person that they've worked with on the committee, on the executive committee, then certainly they might want to recommend, someone from the committee presently who might make a good president, treasurer, secretary, whatever. So yes, they are a member, and as a member, they have every right to recommend anybody. They can just never be a part of the committee. That's in the bylaws, that they are not members of the nominating committee and cannot be.
If there aren't any other questions, Jackie, I think we've concluded. Going once, going twice.
And just again, any further questions? I know questions always come up all the time. My email's always open, leadershiptraining@nyspta.org. So please feel free to email me with your questions if you think of it after the webinar is over. And also this webinar will be available on the website. So if you want to check over any of the slides or any of the comments or even the question and answer period, please feel free to do so, and share it. Okay, share the information, especially if you're a member of the nominating committee. Make sure that the process is done in the manner that it should be, so that there is no contention, there's no suspicion, and you keep everything above board and transparent, which will only help to grow your membership in the future. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Our next webinar will be March 19th. Okay. And you will check your social media and Instagram and the other platforms that we use to communicate with you for information on that next webinar, March 19th. Thank you all for the great questions. I hope you learned a lot, and good luck with the nominating committee process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.